Youth climate change activist Sibusiso Mazomba joins us now via Zoom from Milan. Thanks so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, tell us about your experience in Milan so far, young people coming together to discuss very important issues. How's it been going for you?
This climate conference is the first of its kind. So we've been very, honored and privileged to be hosted by the Italian government. There has been 400 people, young people from, across the world, exchanging ideas on how we can move forward on climate change, and, how we can precipitate greater climate action across governments in the world. And so today was the first day of negotiations. We were working on, some of the perspectives, some of the actions that we would like to see, presented at COP26. We're working on a declaration collectively. So there's 4 working groups. I was part of the Climate Conscious Society working groups, just sharing perspectives on how, we can raise awareness around education, making sure that vulnerable communities and marginalized communities in the global south, their perspectives are represented in policy as well. So those have been some of the perspectives shared in the conference so far. We still have 2 days of negotiations to go, and looking forward to engaging with all the young people that are present at the conference.
Are you getting a sense that the issues that we face here in South Africa are similar to other parts of the world as you interact with colleagues from everywhere?
Yeah. So it has been a very interesting day today. So as I said, we had our negotiations. And while discussing, what I realized was that, the South African climate discourse movement that has been led by young people in South Africa, through organizations like the African Climate Alliance that, allows young people in the country to come together and mobilize and to share perspectives on how we can catapult greater climate action, through the South African Institute of International Affairs that is working on the National Youth Climate Action Plan. Those movements, they are uniquely intersectional, and intersectionality as an underpinning principle for climate action was not a perspective, quite interestingly, that was shared by other delegates in my working group today. So it has been it's been a matter of making sure that as a delegate from South Africa, one of the most unequal countries in the world, how do I bring the perspectives of making sure that the poorest and the most marginalized, they do not have to bear the impacts of climate change in the future. So those were some of the sentiments that I had to push across to the other delegates, so that we could have that in the declaration as well. So that has been quite interesting.
So tell me about the negotiations and the debates. Your older counterparts, our leaders, they get to these gatherings, they come with very firm positions and very little gets done. Do you get a sense that at your level, as young people, there's greater cooperation?
Yeah. So, the climate movement has been led by young people. The urgency that we're seeing now, it's, fostered by young people through school strikes, through young people who are, lobbying at community level, using bottom-up approaches to, call for greater action. And so I think most definitely we do understand the importance of firstly collaborating with each other. So making sure that, we acknowledge each other's lived experiences, because we do know that they will be different. And so firstly acknowledging that is important, and respecting each other's, different experiences to how climate change will affect us differently. And it was a space where we were all, allowed to participate, and each of our voices were recognized. And so I think the partnerships that we formed today and, in the negotiations moving forward, it really then allows us to have that, solidarity, which is, one of the key things that we're calling for, solidarity even after the conference, because as you said, our leaders, they tend to commit to climate action. You go to COP and this declarations come out, and after the conference, nothing really happens. So I'm, feeling very hopeful that as young people who are present at this conference this week, we will, continue working together even after the conference. For example, there was African delegates. We were, talking amongst ourselves as to how we can find points of synergy even after the conference to make sure that we not only, speak to each other and acknowledge each other's work and see how we can collaborate on that, but also how do we work on the declaration just so that we're not, handing it over to our leaders at COP, so that we, follow through and see how we can fit that declaration into each of our regional contexts. So I think we really understand the importance of collaboration and also implementing, some of the ambitions that we come up with.
So are you getting a clearer picture about what you might want to say to COP 26 in Glasgow?
Yeah, so it's been, a day of debating, discussing, going back and just debating again. But it's so we're fine tuning it a bit more. We're still working on the declaration. We still have 2 more days to go. But just very briefly, some of the perspectives that have been shared today, firstly, just making sure that, the impacts, climate impacts, they're showcased. So mainstreaming, impacts of climate change on vulnerable communities, making sure that vulnerable communities are part of, climate discourse. They also have to be, part of the decision-making process. Calling for policies that, are underpinned by intersectionality, are underpinned by, the need for a green and a just transition. So in the Youth Driving Ambition Working Group, perspectives of just making sure that there is, greater solidarity among young people. As young people, youth organizations, even working in silos is something that's unfortunately tends to be a reality. So just making sure that as young people, we can, foster that solidarity were some of the ambitions that we came up with today. But it's definitely a working process. So we're still working on, getting the intricate details of the declaration into perspective.
All right. Do you think that young people's voices are getting some hearing time more and more as you continue with your activism, as you continue with your work?
So there was a process in the country, the nationally determined contribution process, and government, consulted with young people, and the young people at the conference at that consultation were very disappointed as to, so it was done virtually and we couldn't even participate. We felt like we were being lectured, unfortunately, and we had to ask and beg for them to recognize our voices and hear us, to unmute our mics so that we could also, participate. So I feel like we definitely have a long way to go with regards to, meaningful inclusion of young people in processes like the NDCs, for example. Another issue is the issue of tokenism. Especially in South Africa, I feel, and I think other fellow climate activists would share the same sentiment. Tokenism is an issue that, is barricading us from contributing meaningfully, because then you get stakeholders come to us, negotiate and discuss with us, but then after that, there isn't any following through. We have to still reach out to them and, ask as to what are the prospects for tailoring more solutions or engaging or just speaking together more. Making sure that young people are part of the process, policy-making process, decision-making processes, and that they are meaningfully, acknowledged as not only, custodians of the world of tomorrow, because then we're going to inherit, the future world, but also as, young people who are working on the ground, who are working in grassroots communities to come up with solutions as to how we can, foster that climate resilience in communities, how we can foster a just transition, circular economies. So it's a work in progress, and we have to, we find that we have to push through walls in order to get that through. But I think with conferences like this, that is the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Milan has piloted, it's definitely a step in the right direction to addressing, meaningful participation of young people in decision making and policy.
All right. You know, the world is very different in different parts. You're in the first world as we speak. And, they talk about rural in Italy. It's not the same story in Africa, what rural means. So I just wonder, do you think maybe we need a Pan-African gathering to give a Pan-African perspective to this climate battle? Because our situation is quite a bit different, isn't it?
Yep, definitely. The sad part and the infuriating part is that in Africa, we're the smallest contributors to climate change, but then we're the ones that are going to feel the impacts most harshest. So it's also a matter of, the exclusionary culture of climate discourse, global climate discourse. African voices are not present in those spaces. The organization that I'm part of, the South African Institute of International Affairs, they've piloted like a program, the Youth Climate Action Plan, which started in the city of Johannesburg, has now filtered across to the national level. Just because we recognize that policy is not underpinned by intersectionality, is not underpinned by fostering equality and fostering climate resilience, so that communities that are most impacted don't have to suffer more consequences. Communities that are marginalized don't have to become more marginalized with the advent of climate change. I think there's so much potential for that process to be filtered up, and also just us as young people, African young people, or African, as the African continent, speaking amongst ourselves. Definitely a Pan-African framework on climate change is long overdue, but we've been all the African delegates in the conference have been speaking amongst each other as to how we can collaborate even after the conference. So I think there's some exciting perspectives there, and how we can use processes that we already have, like the Youth Climate Action Plans, to filter that to continental or regional levels as well.
Sibusiso, we're going to have to leave it there. I cannot tell you how pleasured I am to have been able to talk to you, and I wish you the very best at your delegates, at your deliberations in Italy and beyond. But thank you so much. I feel very hopeful seeing young people like you doing amazing things. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for the awesome conversation.
Wonderful.